Hi everyone, I'm so sorry I can't be there this week, but luckily it is a hybrid class, so this part will just have to be online. But I did want to send some reminders since we're not meeting in person. So what we're going to do, I definitely want to make sure that you're still working with your group to finalize the mini presentation video. We're going to show the mini presentation videos next week, which is September 18th. So make sure you submit it online to me by the 17th so I can make sure, one, that I have everybody's video and that I could kind of pre-prep it to show in class so that we can all kind of talk about it together. But tonight and tomorrow night, if you need, I still want you to meet with your group, and this can be by conference call, or it can be over Zoom, or through Google Docs in some way, or email. But definitely still meet and talk about where you are at with the video. If you still have to talk about certain aspects around your goals and objectives or audience or ideas about the materials, definitely still meet. But by tomorrow night, so Thursday night, post a brief update. Again, this is going to be look for it online, and I'll have a few kind of pointer questions there. But I want you to post a brief update on how your group is doing towards finishing the mini presentation video. If you have any questions, and or even a short summary if you are able to just write that. I just want to make sure that everybody's still meeting and talking, and that you are well prepared for next week to turn in a video by the night before. Also this week for the writing lab, we're going to start talking about an evaluation plan, and I'll explain that in the next few slides. But also before next class, so at least by the 17th, again, it doesn't have to be too detailed. Again, I'll go over it in a second. But I just want to make sure you're starting to think about your evaluation plan and the online survey. A little bit of a heads up for week 4. Week 4 is when we're showing the videos, and then after learning the material from week 4, quiz 2 will be due September 24th. So those are kind of the week 3 to-dos and reminders to keep you on track for this class. Okay, so just as another reminder, tips for your mini presentation. We went over this last week, but you'll want to choose a very specific behavior. Again, not too broad, not too specific where you can't, do much, but make sure that I think I spoke with every group and everybody was pretty much on track and had a good behavior picked out. But again, just really think about what behavior you are wanting to change and make an impact on. Who's your audience? I think everyone had a pretty good idea there. And then last week, before you left, I had you kind of draw out your theory and how it's connected to your slogans. So make sure that's included in your mini presentation. And then lastly, developing, you don't have to include the materials, even if you have started and got ahead a little bit. Really, the purpose of the mini presentation is just to start seeing how everything is connected, from the behavior to the audience to the theory to the slogans, to then how does that inform the type of materials and the poster or media materials that you have. So again, I think I met with every group and you had some pretty good materials picked out, but I also pushed everyone, this last bullet I added, to think about innovation. Now we know what the standard, answers are. If you're going to do an intervention on this group about this topic, there's some standard things you can do. But again, I want to push everyone at this level to think about what can you do that is a little bit more innovative, a little bit more outside of the box, more than just what a typical good answer would be for this type of an assignment. So that's what I'll be looking for in the mini presentation. Generally it's just to make sure that you're setting up well for your final presentation. Okay, here are a few presentation inspirations. I think these are actual final presentations, so just kind of pay attention to the first half. which is what you're doing for your mini presentation. But again, here are some other links that you can look and watch their videos to get a little bit of inspiration for how your presentations might look. Okay, and then lastly for the writing lab, as I mentioned, since we already did, scale and survey development by hand in 532, I want you just to demonstrate your knowledge here, and we're going to be doing a quick short survey. And again, instead of by hand, we're going to do it online. So for this writing lab, I want you to just meet with your group briefly. Again, it doesn't have to be too detailed at this point. I just want to make sure you're thinking about it. But start drafting ideas on which questions you want to include in your online survey. And just kind of think about, that mostly the other students are going to be watching some type of informational video. I think one or two groups might be doing one activity in person, which can accompany your video, that's fine. But generally just be really practical and purposeful about what you can assess. If you're presenting statistics and knowledge, maybe you have a couple questions about that. If you're trying to inspire intention to do something, maybe you have a question about that. So just really think about, what's realistic to ask. Of course, decide on which survey platform you're going to use. Are you going to use Qualtrics? Are you going to use SurveyMonkey or some other type of online survey platform? Just make sure you guys decide on that and write that one down as well. And then come up with at least 5 to 7 questions that you can use to evaluate, which essentially be the second half. So evaluate the material and the curriculum that you're presenting. So again, it's not the first half, which is a little bit more academic. Once you give your final presentation, the second half of your presentation is the actual material and curriculum to your specific audience, and that is who you kind of imagine would be answering these 5 to 7 questions. So come up with at least 5 to 7 questions that we can do really quickly through an online survey. Keep it short and simple, and it is not included in the mini presentation. So again, go back to the slide where I talk about the mini presentation. That's all that you need to include. This extra writing lab is just what we would have been doing in class, just to get you started thinking about your evaluation plan. And again, as I mentioned, just submit a draft of your notes with all of these ideas before next class, because again, this is what we would have done this week. So I just want to get some drafts just to make sure you're already starting to think about it. And lucky for me, I actually found an old voiceover of Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. So the rest of these slides are still voiceovered, but ignore anything if I reference like another class or something else that's due. I think it's pretty straightforward. I haven't listened to the whole thing again, but I was just lucky to find that I had already had a voiceover for Chapter 7 and Chapter 8, which I was going to do live this week. So again, if there's some reference to something that doesn't make sense, it's probably because it's an old voiceover after this point. So again, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out to me. Sorry I couldn't be in class this week, but I look forward to seeing all of the responses that you have online, and I look forward to seeing you next week. As I mentioned, this week we will be going over selecting presentation materials. So when we think about how people process information, we know that you need information, but it's not always sufficient for encouraging behavior change. Individuals are limited in how much information they can process, which is why it's great we have 7-digit numbers and not 20-digit numbers, telephone numbers that we need to remember. 7 is usually a good number as far as lists and numbers go, so kind of keep that in mind as well. But you want to make it easy, basically easy for people to process information. That might come in chunking out information, in ways that people can make decisions fast and easily. So basically, you just want to think about, how do people process information and how can I make it easier for them? When you're doing that and making materials or thinking about how someone's going to take on the information you're presented, you want to really think about, well, first of all, making sure that it's clear, that it takes little effort to really understand, but also that it draws someone's attention. And I think we saw a few of those examples in the posters that you all came up with, or that I talked about last week as well. What really grabs someone's attention, and that also helps them process information. The amount of effort that someone will take in order to understand really depends on their motivation. Is it a topic of interest? And again, is it easy and clear to read? Does it capture attention? It also depends on that particular person's perception. So there is some, effort that's needed, but it's really based a lot on these three things: motivation, attention, and perception. Before anyone uses health information, well, first it has to be available. So if you don't have it, you can't use it. It also has to be perceived as useful. So just like the mental health, anxiety poster that we talked about last week, that is useful. Here are some tips on how to reduce anxiety in youth. And so really thinking about what is useful and even practical for someone to be able to do and change behavior. When you think about format, it has to be format friendly. So what is the easiest way for someone to process the information and really have a good format for that? You should also choose the most important points. You already know that you have limited space when you're trying to convey messages. So what are the most important and useful points of communication that you can deliver? So a lot of times this takes practice and skill, but you want to be able to synthesize information and make sure that it's presented in a way that appeals to your audience. You want to keep in mind that people probably have related choices in the past, and so they're not empty vessels. So there's some experience that people have, and they're going to relate that experience to what you're presenting. How do people learn? We know that when you think about learning and the different forms of presenting, you're really only retaining information 5% from lecture, kind of like what I'm doing now. 10% from reading on your own, so hopefully those two help combine. Actually, perhaps maybe this is audiovisual since I'm doing a voiceover. But really, you're going to see the most amount of learning when you're able to demonstrate, when you're able to discuss, and even more so, practice by doing something, so hands-on, and you learn the most when you actually teach others. And this is why, even though a lot of the material you can kind of read about and understand, I always still try to have at least one online activity so you're interacting with the material, kind of discussion and part practice by doing. So like this week, I'll have you critique some posters based on the lecture that we're going to talk about right now on how to critique. So hopefully, instead of just reading and thinking about the information, that online activity will help you take the information that we talk about right now and actually practice doing it. So critiquing posters and using the skills and questions that we're going to talk about as far as evaluating presentation materials. So again, here are the different ways that people learn. And again, more effectively, you are able to learn and retain information when you're doing some of these latter things: discussion, practice, and teaching others.
There are also different learning styles. So some people are auditory learners. They like to be read to, they like to read out loud, and they like to talk about their ideas. And so some people just really like to listen and think about, what it is that you're learning. So if you like the voiceovers, you might just kind of listen to the voiceovers, and that really helps you with the learning of some of our course material. And then some people are visual learners. So they like to read, take notes, use worksheets, highlight things, and look at information more from a visual representation than perhaps numbers, things like that, but maybe more pictures or graphics. So there's something more visual about the information that these type of learners are drawn to. The third type of learner is kinesthetic learner. These are people that like to move around in order to learn information. They might need frequent breaks. Rhythms and music are some type of other types of senses maybe involved in learning, but also in different settings and maybe in different contexts. I would say overall, kinesthetic learners are very hands-on learners. So again, you have the three different types. You have visual learners, you have auditory learners, and you have kinesthetic learners. The reason we're talking about processing information and the different types of learning styles is you want to keep these in mind when you're creating your presentation materials for your project. So as you're thinking about, should we do a poster? Should we do a little video or commercial? Really think about how much are you hitting on the three different learning styles, but also what does your information look like? And is it something that's easily processed and format friendly? So that's kind of the gist of these first two mini topics that I just went over. Really take this information and think about it as far as health communication in general, but also think about it for your projects and how are you kind of hitting or addressing a lot of these topics. Now you're also working in teams. So again, these topics are for broader health communication, but you can apply these to working in your team. The main thing, listen, and listen to each other. So a lot of time this says, I hear you, but I'm not listening. So when you're listening, try to be an active listener and not just waiting for your turn to chime in with your solution. So that's part of being a team player. So try your best to avoid being stubborn or defensive. Take in other ideas. Also be willing to give up your idea to try someone else's. So there might be two members who have two great ideas, but try to come to some consensus or a vote, or just try, be willing to give up your idea and for someone else's. Everyone should practice also being a good leader. So always listening and communicating, but kind of aggregating the information. A leader doesn't always have to come up with all the answers and solutions. So if you find that you're the only one coming up with answers and solutions, maybe try sit back, ask more questions, do more listening, kind of work together as a team to make sure, one, that everyone feels included. So if someone is not speaking up or participating as much, make sure you're at least reaching out and say, what do you think about XYZ? But again, the concepts that we've talked about, not only for health communication and building, but you can apply a lot of these processing and learning styles into also working in a team. So maybe some of your team members are more visual, maybe some are more auditory, maybe some want to be more hands-on and are kinesthetic learners. So again, you can also apply these concepts to your team. And a big thank you to everyone for putting together the group project charters. I had a quick peek at them before I did this voiceover, and I was really pleased to see how everyone identified their strengths and weaknesses and how they're going to contribute to the project. So I'm glad we did that, and so everyone's kind of on track with getting together and working in your team. Okay, now on to a little bit of presentation methods. And just for the ease of everything, for our specific projects, most people will end up doing posters or pamphlets or mini commercials. But when you really think about potential presentation methods for health communications or campaigns or projects and programs, you really have this whole list at your fingertips. It can be audiovisual. The program or project can include brainstorming, debates, demonstrations, large and small group discussion, role playing. So there are a lot of ways that you can present health information, and these are just a few examples. So criteria for previewing educational material. Just as we mentioned for the mini presentation, you really want to think about who is your intended target audience and what is the purpose or objective. For many of our projects, it's influencing behavior change or positive impact on a type of behavior, but you really want to think about what is the objective, and then related to that, what are the major messages? What does the piece specifically tell the reader to do? So many times this is called the action, call to action. So you have some type of material, but at the end of it, what are you really asking your audience or your reader to do? In our health communication, we hope it's to do some type of healthy behavior. But think about these questions as you're thinking about your materials that you're creating. You also want to make sure that your materials are not cluttered. You're highlighting what is interesting and important, that is clear. Of course, that is accurate, especially when it comes to safety. But that it's also acceptable and culturally and age appropriate for your audience. You really want to get to know your audience so you know how to make things attractive and make it motivating. And you do want to incorporate a lot of these and think about them when you're creating your materials. You also want to ask, does this piece require training? For the most part, unless your audience are people who already have a specific training, you want to minimize what people need to do in order to process the information. So hopefully they don't need training in order to look at your materials for the health education piece. So you really want it to be more standalone. It could be a standalone commercial or a poster or a pamphlet. But for the most part, you want to make sure that your audience doesn't need other information in order to process the material that you're presenting. And of course, you also want to think about, based on your audience, where the materials or the different pieces can be distributed. And again, based on your audience. It's really hard to find bad posters, but I think I found a few of them. This one, I forgot the word for spacing, which is this, problem exactly. But this is funny because it says how to piss off your designer friends and give them a migraine. There's a specific word for making sure that your letters are adjusted, they're in line, it's nice and clear and concise. But a poster like this is really going to give not only your designer friends, but everybody probably a headache and a migraine just trying to figure out what's going on. I did manage to find two posters that aren't very, clear. They're very cluttered. It's really hard to read the information. The first one has, you reading like it's going from front to back or back to front, and then instead of going from left to right, the text going diagonal from right to left is very hard to read. So overall, it's not clear. I'm not motivated to, work hard to figure out what's going on. So again, it's kind of hard to find bad posters, but these are probably some good examples of what you don't want your posters to look like. Now, when you're thinking about your material, there are 3 areas specifically I want you to pay attention to, and that's content, graphics, and layout. So for content, of course, you want to make sure that it's easily understood. If they can't pay attention, obviously they're going to miss the main point. And you want to make sure that it's really clear how it's helping solve their problems, or how the content is helping to solve the problem. And of course, in health communication or health promotion, we're trying to make sure they understand what steps they're taking in order to improve health, or understand, what it is that we're asking. And you want to make sure that the scope is limited. So you're not asking the world of things, but you're asking for, something very specific to happen, that you want your audience, that you want your reader to understand that they need to do. So you want to limit the scope and make sure that's very clear. And then also, is there a review or summary of the key points? So if you have a pamphlet, that might be a great idea to have some type of a summary. It might not be the best in a poster, but it could also work in a video. So maybe at the end, you reiterate some of the main points. So this is all about content. Is the content easily understood? Does the content help, solve the problem or address the issue? And is it focused or limited in scope so that it's easier to understand, what people need and what is actually reasonable for them to do, and not the whole world? And then where appropriate, depending on the type of material that you're presenting, should you include a summary of key points? So that's all about content. When we get to graphics, again, you always want to make sure that things are simple and clear. Again, depending on your audience, you want to make sure that, there's hopefully just one interpretation. Sometimes, if it's kind of fancy art and you can't tell what it is, that would be a problem for graphics. But you also want to be, I guess the message for me here with graphics is be purposeful. So do the graphics or illustrations reinforce the content? What is it that you're trying to say? And earlier we talked about being clear and concise. So do the graphics reinforce the content? Does the graphic contribute to your goals and objectives for that material? And are you illustrating the key points visually or through text? So really think about, those types of questions. And then just remember that captions are used to explain graphics. You don't want to add any new information there. But that's kind of 6 and 7. So are all graphics and illustrations carefully and fully explained in the text near the graphic itself? So I think, again, for me, the main point with evaluating graphics and thinking about what you're going to include is that the graphic is very purposeful. It's just not a nice idea or like, hey, I really like this picture, I want to add it into our poster. You're really thinking about, how does this align with the content? Is it simple and clear? And does it help to meet our objectives for this educational piece or material? And the third thing is layout. So here are questions that you want to ask. Are the illustrations and graphics near the text? Is there adequate white space? So you don't want to use up the whole entire sheet. You should always have plenty of white space. It helps draw attention to the center when you have adequate white space. Of course, you want to consider the color and the contrast. You don't want two colors that make it hard to read. And depending on the material, if it's a poster, is the print large enough? Are you using, mostly one font? You don't want to confuse, people or have it look, odd by having different fonts. And also sometimes we think that caps are helpful, but it actually slows reading down. So if you are using caps, you want to be really mindful of that because it doesn't highlight as much as you think. And again, back to how many things do we remember and how do we process? Again, you want to keep it to no more than 7 items, like 7 digits on a telephone. For a telephone number, you want to keep it 5 to 7 in a list. And so that's pretty much as we can remember. So few people can remember more than that, especially if there's lower literacy, then you may want to keep it to 3 to 5 items on a list. But this is all about layout. So how are things spaced? What does the color look like and the contrast? Is there adequate white space? Are you using, mostly one font, no caps? And is the layout of the number of items on a list somewhere between 5 and 7, or depending on literacy, even limited to 3 to 5 items. So again, this is all about layout. Here's a poster that we can look at. So if I were to critique this poster, and this is actually your online activity, I would use those 3 areas, looking at content, graphics, and layout. So for content, looking at this, weapons of mass destruction, picture of donuts, simple choices make all the difference, minimize junk food, I see nutritious snacks, and then towards the end, start making smart choices today with 3 items. So just off of the bat, to me, this seems very clear and concise and has a very clean look. As far as content, this has something to do with DoD, Department of Defense. So it is very catchy and easily understood, especially if that is their specific audience. So weapons of mass destruction, that elicits some feeling for this audience. But it's catchy because it's donuts. And at the same time, it highlights the problem, donuts being a weapon of mass destruction, again, in a catchy kind of way. But later on, at the end, it also provides a solution. So again, for content, I think it's catchy, easily understood, and it does highlight the problem and solution. As far as graphics, you have the 2 logos on the bottom, you have the color contrast green over white background, but also just the graphic of the donuts. It's very simple and clear. It also kind of makes you a little hungry, but the donuts look real. So they're not fake donuts, they actually look real and they look good. But again, the graphic should really contribute to the key point, which is you need to make smart choices and eat healthy. And it reinforces the content. So minimize junk food. So minimize having these donuts because they are a weapon of mass destruction. And then thinking about the layout, if you notice, this particular poster has a lot of white space. And it really does draw your attention to the donuts, and also to the words, weapons of mass destruction. So I think that this particular poster does use white space, and I think it's done well. One critique that I have for this is depending on where this poster is supposed to be. Is it, in an office? Is it a large poster? I do think that the print may be a little bit small, so it might not be large enough. But again, it just kind of depends on where, if this was going to be a handout, it might just be fine. But if it was meant to be a poster that people can read from 2 to 3 to 4 feet away, then you would want, the text to be a little bit larger. So that might be one critique. But as far as layout, and remember, we want to have short lists. The list here is really around the solution and the call to action. And there are really only 3 items. It's stay fit, stay smart, and stay ready. So again, 3 simple things to remember as part of your solution against weapons of mass destruction, which is junk food. So overall, just kind of thinking about this poster, laid out a few thoughts on content, graphics, and layout. So this is exactly the type of thing that I'd like you to do for the online activity. It doesn't have to be as long as I spoke, but at least have 1 or 2 sentences per area. So 1 or 2 sentences on content, graphics, and layout in the online activity, and I'll mention that again below. So as you're looking at posters and also thinking about the material that you're going to have for your program, you can also think about whether there's some type of interaction with the text or graphics. So readers should be asked to do something. So again, it's kind of like a call to action. But you also want to make sure that what you're asking is doable. So when something is, doable and something that people feel they can do, they're more motivated to do it. You also want to make sure, again, depending on your audience, that you're really thinking about the language, the logic, so kind of way of thinking, cultural images. Are they positive? Are they appropriate and realistic? Is it respectful? And is the material written in appropriate way or readability level? But again, you just want to think about cultural appropriateness and also literacy demands. In general, no matter what you're writing, everything should mostly be at a 5th grade reading level. And then if you have to lower it from there, you make the readability, easier. But there are websites that you can check. You can type in text and it will tell you what reading level or what grade your text is in. So that's probably something you can Google easily, like assess, grade, reading level, and you should be able to enter text and kind of get some feedback on what grading level. So again, you kind of want to aim for about 5th grade. And continuing on cultural appropriateness and literacy, does the material use common and explicit words? So heart disease rather than coronary artery disease. And then is it organized? So are there headers and topics and things that lead people to where you want them to look and visualize? And also, does it advance the preparedness of one's thoughts to process what they expect sort of for the next topic or the next action step? Being kind of organized in this way and having headers and topics also helps not only draw people to what to read, but it also can help people choose and pick what they want to read. So if you have different sections, for example, in a pamphlet, they might say, I'm really interested in healthy eating versus the exercise portion versus this other section. So sometimes you leave it up to the reader to choose from your material, and whether it's within one material like a pamphlet or maybe a whole binder, but just think about your material and how you're helping to organize the thoughts and how someone processes your information. And lastly, before I get into our online activity, when you think about evaluating, what you've decided to use for your educational material. Again, whether it's a poster, whether it's a mini commercial or a pamphlet or some dramatization, you want to make sure that the method is helpful in understanding the content, that is appropriate for the learning style that you're trying to focus on. For our class and for this presentation, you definitely want to hit on at least 2 learning styles, and all 3 if you can. And you also want to make sure that whatever method you choose is helpful for your audience in staying focused on what you're presenting. Of course, you want to make it easy to learn and process. And then all of this together should be make sure that your method, your content, the learning style, the way of processing, all of that should be helpful in achieving the objectives of your health communication in your educational materials. So just make sure the methods that you're using and that you chose or that you choose align with your audience, align with the goals of your health communication, and that you're meeting all the objectives that you intend.